So the very first thing we need to use when we're building anything in SharePoint is everything starts with the SharePoint site. So I have a SharePoint site in front of you that I just have newly created. This in your situation, this could be a site that you're already working with, or you may create a new site based around your Power App. Either way, SharePoint always starts with a site, and it's really good to sort of work backwards as far as permissions and content based on your site. That way your administration and working with your actual lists is, you do this in more of an organized way. So, typically you might even create a site just for your application, and many times I've created a SharePoint site just to support my Power Apps application. Here's our SharePoint site, and if you haven't used SharePoint before, it's pretty easy to work with. There's a few things that you sort of need to get your head around, but a lot of the administrational functions are kept behind this little cog in the top right hand corner. So if we click on that, we get this pop fly out menu that shows us all these different options we can do in SharePoint. One of them is site content. So let's click on that. So let's start off by creating two lists, one an issues list and one an actions list. So let's create a blank list and we'll call this issues. First up, I'm going to click on the cog and I'm going to go to list settings. And here I'm going to define my columns within my list. And this is going to be the data that I will be storing from my Power App. So I am going to create a description column. And this is going to be multiple lines of text. So you can see we can define a whole heap of different data types. I'm going to leave everything else default. If we go back to the list there, we can see we have our title column, which we get by default when you create a new SharePoint list. Every list you create will always have a title column. And now we also have our description column. Let's just leave it at that to keep this as simple as we can. Now we're going to create a new list. So let's go back to home, create new list, blank list, and we'll call this actions. Back up to the cog. Let's create some columns in our actions list now. So I'm going to click on create column. And I am going to also put a description. Actually, no, I won't. I'm going to put let's just call it description. It's also going to be multiple lines of text. So let's go back up to home. And we can just browse around our SharePoint site using this out-of-the-box navigation that we get with SharePoint. So let's go up to the cog and let's go back to site contents. See, now we've got an issues list and an actions list, and we haven't created any items in there. So as it stands, these two SharePoint lists, we could connect to them in Power Apps. So let's go ahead and do that now. So here we have Power Apps open now, our makepowerapps.com screen. And the first thing I'm going to do is just click on Canvas app from blank. Now, I'm going to try to keep this, just call this demo. Skip that. Now I'm just going to create a blank app, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible with just the minimum amount of working parts here, so you can get a really good idea of how this should actually work. Now we've blank app, we're just given the app and a screen, and for the screen we're just going to create a, well, let's create a connection, a couple of data connections, because we're going to need those data connections to our issues and actions lists that we put in SharePoint. So let's do a search for SharePoint. All we do here is put our SharePoint site in, our URL to our SharePoint site that we are connecting to. And when we do that, we can see the actions and issues list that we created before. So let's highlight both of those and connect to them. Now we have two data connections connecting to our SharePoint lists. First off, let's insert a gallery, the good old faithful gallery. I'm just going to create a blank gallery here. And I want this to show our issues list. Now, of course, there's not going to be any data in our SharePoint list at the moment because it's just a newly created issues list. Now, if you're not used to working with Power Apps galleries, I did do a video a while ago quite some time ago on working with Power Apps galleries, but it should still be fairly relevant, and I'll just link to that in the video description below. But I think I can also pop up a link on the screen now. So either way, I'll point you to that video so it's easy to find. But what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to set my gallery up so it's easier to use here. And a couple of things I like doing is just adding a border around it. So I'll do that with this particular property here. So now we can see the edges of the gallery. Might just drop this down. Now we can get lost for ages in here, but what some of the important things that we can see is that I'm working with the gallery in screen 1, and I've got that highlighted. I'm going to just change this, and I like calling my galleries gal_issues. Just naming them something that makes sense. So inside of my gallery, I'm going to create some new fields. So I'll highlight the gallery, highlight the cell inside of the gallery, and I'll just click a label. And I want this to point to the ID field. So you can see here we're working with the gallery now, and this is the data source that's connected. I'm seeing the fields from the data source, which is our SharePoint list. Now, one of the things that you get with SharePoint, with a SharePoint list, you get an automatic ID column. And that ID column is what we're going to use to identify each record that we create inside of our list. So let me select ID. I'm going to show the ID field. Let's create another label in here. And let's just make this the title, which it's automatically selected title, which is great. Let's add a button at the top of the screen here, and we'll just add a big plus button. What this is going to do is, let's call this button add issue. This button is going to create a new issue for us in our issue list. So let's go ahead and generate a new screen for that. The way we do that, we go up to new screen, and I'm just going to select a blank screen here. And let's chuck a label right up the top, and new issue. Let's make this text a lot bigger. Right, I'm not going to fuss about too much about how ugly or pretty this is. This is purely just a technical demo and to show you how to do this. So I'm not going to get really fussy with it. Right, so the next thing we need is an input field, because we're going to be inputting a title for our issue. Let's put a label in here too. Let's call that title. This will be text title new. So this is just my own naming convention for fields in Power Apps. You don't need to use this convention. You can call these fields anything you like. as long as it makes sense to you, and I guess it makes sense to the organization that you're building this app for, and perhaps most importantly, the people that you may be handing this app over to. You want to make sure that these fields are named in a way that people understand what they are. And as you're developing a Power App, doesn't matter if it's a SharePoint list that you're storing data to or a SQL table or whatever. These fields are really important to name them and come up with some good naming convention that at the very least makes sense to you, because these fields, when you start having multiple screens and you have loads and loads of fields in your app, you want to make sure that you can keep track of what you're saving and what you're working with at any one time. If you've used Power Apps much before, or you're a developer, say you develop JavaScript apps or some other, you're a developer in another language, you'll understand the concept of this idea of having global variables versus local variables. So I guess you can think of these fields that you're creating in your Power App as global variables. So it doesn't matter what screen you're in, it doesn't matter where you are in your Power App, these are all visible anywhere. So whenever you're referencing one of these fields, you'll be able to reference it anywhere inside of your Power App. So effectively, they're global. So of course, you really want to keep that namespace tidy, and you really want it to make sense, so you don't sort of get yourself into trouble. Right, so that's our title field done. So remember we created another field in our issues list called description. So we need a text input for that. Let's make that big, because remember it's a multi-line description. And by default, these text inputs are just single line, but if we click on that and we go over to the properties, we can change the mode here to multi-line. So that'll allow us to do multi-line input. Let's just bold these as well. Let's make these look a bit better. Oh. Cool. Let's bold that as well. Now, let's just rename this as well. Issue description _new. Last thing we need here is a save button, so we can save our record. Let's just put this in the bottom right hand corner. So on selecting this button, or when we press this button, we want to save this issue, this new issue, to our SharePoint list. And the way we do that, we can use the patch. Well, the best way I've found to do that is using the patch command, or the patch function. I have got a video on the patch function that I did it quite some time ago, but it should still be relevant, and I will link to it somewhere on the screen now and also in the description below. Right, so the patch function takes the source, and I know our data source is called issues. Even prompts us here, so it shows us that's a valid selection. Because we're working with a data source, we'll use the defaults function and pass it our data source. And we do that just as the syntax of the patch function. This basically by default says that we're writing a new record to our data connection. And in here, we want to pass it a record of all of our fields that we're saving to SharePoint. So the first field that we're going to save is title. And the value we're passing to it is our title new value. Text. The next field we want to pass to it is the description. So the column in SharePoint is called description, and my field in my Power App is called description txt issue description underscore new. And that's the field name, but we have to access the text property of that field. So see how I've got the field title, the field name, .txt, text. So this is, if we just tried to pass the actual field itself, it wouldn't work. We need to, all we want to pass is the value that we capture from that particular field. Right, so that should work, and as a bare minimum, this will work as an application. So the last thing I want to do is I want to navigate back to screen 1, and I'll just do a uncover. All right, so back on screen 1. All we want this to do, on select, so we're changing the on select property. We want this to navigate to screen 2. And because we're doing an uncover when we're saving, so we'll be covering the screen as the animation. So all I'm doing here is I'm telling it what sort of animation I want when I'm updating this, or when I'm clicking on the button, or when I'm navigating to that screen. Let's just quickly check in the title here. Issues and actions. Make that bold. All right, that looks a little bit better. Right, so let's click on that. And we get our new issues screen. Let's type something. This is a new issue. Please fix the sink in the bathroom. And I'll click save. All right, so that has saved the record and takes us back to, because I had that navigate that takes us back to screen 1. And you can see in our gallery is automatically refreshed to show our new issue that we've just created. Like I said, I wanted to keep this space here on the right free to add additional controls. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to make sure I've got this particular cell, selected. And I'm going to go up to, I find the icons are really good here. So I'm going to choose the edit icon, and that will add that to our gallery cell. So what this means is when I click on this, it will be selecting that particular gallery item, but I can also it'll do that by default by selecting the parent, but then I can also get it to do something else. So let's do that now. So in here, well, first off, we're going to need another screen. So because I'm going to want to show this information, let's make a duplicate of that screen. Let's just call that screen 3. And when I click on this, separate that one. So I want to do more than one action for this particular button. So I separate those actions by using a semicolon. And the next thing I want to do is navigate to screen 3. And I'll use a cover animation again. Let's just check if that works. It does. Let's go back to screen 1. Actually, let's go to screen 3. Now, in my app, we don't want, once you're creating a new issue, we don't want people to be able to update this issue again. So let's just change these fields to, let's just change these display, the display of these fields to view. Again, let's make this display mode view. Squish this up a bit. We're going to need a bit more room. All right. So in here, next thing we need to do, we want to change the default text to be the item we selected in the gallery. So the way we do that is that we find our gallery that we created and we hit selected, which means that whatever the last item that was just selected on the gallery, so whatever is currently selected in the gallery, show me the data from within that record. And for description, I'm just going to select description here. And in here, we just want to change this button, maybe say back. So we don't want users to be able to save, so that button's no longer a save button, it's now a back button. And in here, we just want to get rid of the patch and we just want to navigate back to screen 1. Right, so let's take a look. Here's our issues and actions gallery. We click on the button, we can see our new issue and we can go back to the gallery. We can also let's create a new issue. Let's now call this kitchen sink tap leaking. Please look at this issue ASAP. All right, awesome. We've got 2 issues now in our issues list. And we can open them and take a look at the detail inside of our detail screen. Now, why we want that new screen here is we want to be able to add actions to an issue. And this is where our database sort of functionality comes in, because we don't just want to create new actions in our actions list. We want to create an action, but we also want to associate those actions with the specific issue that we currently have open. So first off, I think this would work good with a gallery for our actions in here. So let's, on our screen 3 here, let's insert another gallery. And our data source for our gallery is going to be the actions list. Let's make sure these things don't overlap. So let's maybe put a border on here as well. And maybe just let's move this down a bit and put a heading up here. Bold that. Right, so in here, we're going to show our actions for our issue. And just like we did with our issues gallery, I'm going to add some labels here. This will be ID. Let's add another label. And yeah, let's just use the title again. And we've left a bit of space on the end there, which is good. So the last thing we want to do is, well, we need a button on here to add new actions. Let's go up to icons. Oh, I'll put that in the wrong place. We need to be outside of our gallery. Before I do that, let's just rename that to gal actions. So if we select outside of our gallery, we insert another add button, and this will be our add button for our new actions. Make that a little bit smaller. And we need another screen for our new actions. So let's create a new blank screen. And this is actually going to be really similar to our new issues form. So I'm lazy, so instead of, I'm just going to duplicate that screen. Let's call this, let's start naming these screens properly. New action. And move that down to the bottom. So this was our new issue. This is our main screen. This is our view issue. So in new action, we do have a action title. So let's just rename this field to action title new, and we have a action description. Rename this field to so that makes sense. So let's change the patch that we used for our save issues, but we're now going to be saving the action. But in this case, we want to save the action relevant to that issue. We need to add another field to our actions list to capture the issue that we're saving it to. So if we go back to our SharePoint site and we open our actions list, we need to create a new column here. So if we go list settings, I'm going to create a new column, and I'm going to call this issue ID. And it is a number column because our ID field is always a number column. Now, one thing quickly that I didn't show before, this is our issues list that we're going to be pulling, well, we're going to be associating actions for each of these issue records. And we're going to be referencing the ID of each field. But what I didn't show you is that, and I did mention it, that SharePoint automatically creates an ID for each list item, but I didn't really show that to you. So let me quickly just edit this list view. And I'm going to add to that view the ID field. Now, I didn't create this ID field. This ID field is automatically created every time we create a new SharePoint list or even a document library. The ID field is automatically generated, just like there are some other fields that are automatically generated when you create a list as well, like things like modified by, created by, and these fields will store data. ID is automatically populated, and so as when you create a new list item, the created date and who created that list item is also stored automatically for us. But if we take a look at ID field, and I'm just going to add this to the position 1 on our view and click OK. If we go back, we see our list items have this incremental number against it, and this will be unique. If I go and create a new issue inside of my app, it will just it'll give it a unique ID, and that ID will be the next number in sequence. If I went and deleted one of these items, it doesn't fill the gap. It just keeps going, and it keeps track of what the next ID is to be issued to the list. So now we have a new column in our actions field, in our actions list called issue ID. If we go back to our Power App, we need to do one thing before we continue, or before we'll be able to see that newly created field in our data source. We just need to go up to our actions list and click on refresh. So now we should be able to, what that does is it goes back to SharePoint and just refreshes that data connection. So now in our new action screen, we've got because we just duplicated this screen from our new issue, we've got this patch from our new issues screen. So we want to change that to actions. That's the name of our data connection. Again, we're creating a new record, so we just select defaults action. We've got a title and description field, and we've got text new action and text action title new and text action description new. So this Power Apps has already made out that correction for us, but if it hadn't, we would need to go in and change these fields to the fields inside of our new screen. So we can see here, this is our txt action description new and txt action title new. So these are correct, but we do need to save one other value, and that's the issue ID. So like I said, this is the issue, this is the ID of the record that we are saving the action to. So this is the ID of the open issue we have at the moment, and this value we're going to get from the gallery issues selected, and we just want to grab the ID of that record. Okay, so that should be good enough. So let's go back up to the issues and actions table, or issues and actions screen, I should say. Let's click on this issue. Now let's create a new, we haven't wired that button in yet. So on select, we want to navigate this back. We want to navigate this to the new actions. And I want to screen cover. Now in the new actions, one of the other things we want to do, we don't want to navigate back to the main screen. We want to navigate to the view issue screen, because that's the screen we're launching that from. So if we go back up to main and we click on new issue, and then we click on new, we have a title mistake here. We want to make that new action. Let's go back up to issues and actions, new issue. Let's click on, so wait, let me go back. So this is a new issue. We didn't really make that very descriptive. Oh, okay. So we didn't put anything in the title here. So where is this coming from? We didn't set this up. Gal issues selected, and this is the title. Right. Let's go back up to main again. Let's do this one because this has a bit of a more meaningful title. So let's add some actions to our kitchen sink tap leaking. So if I click on the pencil, I can see the issue details here, but I want to add an action. Looked into this, and it's going to take a while to fix. See title for more info. Let's click save on that. And now that has created an action inside of our actions list. There is a problem with this though. If we go back in here and we go to the issue 1, remember we were editing issue 2. If we go to issue 1, we open that, we can still see that particular action. So at the moment, it's just showing us all the actions inside of the action list. What we actually want to do here is we want to filter this particular gallery based on what issue we have open. So in our view issue, so at the moment, like I said, we're just looking at the actions, but we don't want to do that. We want to wrap this in a filter. And what are we filtering it by? We want to filter these by when it was the issue ID. So we only want to show records in this particular view or this particular gallery when the issue ID is equal to the gallery issues selected ID. So what we're saying here is we only want to show records in here when saved issue ID, so the actions issue ID field is equal to whatever issue we've selected in our issues gallery. So we can see now we can't see anything there, but if we go back and we click on the actual issue that we created the action against, now we're seeing that value correctly. So in our actions list, we're saving the title of our action, our description, but we can also see here we've saved another value called issue ID, and we've recorded the issue that we had open at the time we created that action against. And this really is effectively, this is the same thing you do when you're saving to a relational database. Now with SharePoint Lists, you don't have that really powerful SQL language behind it, but you do have the ability in Power Apps to be able to write queries and filters against this data. And as long as you keep those filters delegable, they'll always return back the correct set of data. All I'm saying is that when you create that filter, that little bit of logic that you are passing to that filter. So in this circumstance, we're doing issue ID equals gal underscore issue selected ID. And because both of these values are numbers, rather than trying to process this filter in Power Apps, effectively doing it on your machine that you're running it on, it passes that query. It doesn't do any processing locally. It passes that query to the SharePoint site or the SharePoint server. SharePoint then filters the data at the data source and gives you back the result back. So rather than trying to grab everything and do everything locally, it just returns back the records filtered. Now this is really important because Power Apps has a limit on the amount of records that it can return back. So if you are trying to return back thousands of records, you're only going to get a certain amount of records back, and by default that cutoff is like 500, which is quite a lot. But when you're filtering, if you can't delegate that filter to the server, so if the server can't do that filter at the server, then it's always just going to start filtering from record 1. So if you're now trying to filter across 1,000 records and it can't delegate that filter to the server, then it's only just going to start that filter from record 1 and go up to the filter limit or record limit, which will be 500 by default, can be set to a maximum of 2,000. So all of those records that fall beyond that range aren't going to be included in your filter, so your result may not be correct. The other thing you can do here is you can do a sort. So you could sort this data as well. So you can wrap that in a sort. We can sort by ID, descending or ascending, or we could might even make sense to wrap that against our actual data connection. But the good thing about sort is that sorting is also delegable. So remember, as long as we can pass that query to the server, we don't get a delegation error. The other great thing is SharePoint shows you when you do get a delegation error, but things like strings, numbers, I think even dates now will delegate. So any kind of filter that you try to do against SharePoint, as long as it's not something that you're like a record or something unusual, SharePoint should be able to do that filtering for you, and you should be able to filter across the entire data set regardless of how many lines there are. Hey, hit the like button if you like this video, comment something in the comments section below, and of course subscribe to stay up to date with all my latest videos. I thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.